Welcome to JS on Politics, a weekly look at what's happening in Wisconsin political matters. Let's give you a quick look at what's ahead on our show today. First, we'll look at the new Bucks Arena. It cleared the assembly this week, and we'll take a look at whether there are any roadblocks left. With the first GOP presidential debate a week away, we'll look at how Scott Walker is faring in the polls. And continuing our Walker theme, we'll look at a variety of issues facing the governor here in Wisconsin and on the campaign trail, and that may or may not include the right way to order a cheesesteak when you're in Philadelphia. We'll also take some viewer questions, so please send them in. Let's begin now with the Bucks Arena. It's cleared the assembly. Our guests to talk with us are Watchdog columnist Daniel Weiss, business reporter Tom Dakin, they've been following a lot of these issues. So the measure passed the assembly with relative ease this week. There's still some roadblocks to clear at the Common Council and at the county. So let's start with the Common Council. Do you see any challenges there, Tom, in terms of getting that through the various committees and the full Common Council?
I think the council will pass it. I mean, the city's contribution is pretty straightforward. It's $47 million. Part of that is to build the new parking structure that'll provide parking not just for the arena, but for other commercial development that'll occur in the Park East Strip. Part of it's going to be for public improvements. There's going to be a public square created by closing off a block of 4th Street between Highland and Juneau and doing some other street work in conjunction with the arena project. You know, tax incremental financing districts, the city's been approving them for decades now. We probably have several dozen of them in Milwaukee alone. And again, it's very straightforward. There's nothing unusual about it. You're a city, you go out and spend money on something, and you pay off that debt through new property taxes generated by the development that you are helping finance.
And they're also hoping to get some debt collection provisions in there too, which would help them with cars, mortgages, and those sorts of things.
The city has a pretty conventional approach. The county, we've had this debate about certifying debt and other things, but the county board doesn't really get a say in that. So what's the controversy though at the county level?
Well, the controversy is going to be, and it'll be much more controversial than it is with the city. The deal creates a $4 million hole in their budget every year, and how are they going to deal with this? The county executive had hoped that they would use this debt certification where they would allow the state to go and collect money from deadbeats and other people, but that provision was taken out. So now they have to come up with a way to come up with this $4 million, and already a number of the members of the county board are criticizing ably for signing off on this deal without having a mechanism to collect that money.
Right, but they don't really get a say in terms of the land sale or the transfer. It's sort of going to happen without them,
that's
right?
That's what Abley wants. He wants to bypass the county board on as many things as possible. With the debt collection, he also it turns out though he needs the support of the comptroller and the head of courts. I mean the treasurer and the clerk of courts, and so he still has to work with a couple of other people to get the $4 million a year.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about, looking ahead, and assuming it's going to get through both of those hurdles. How quickly, Tom, do you think we'll see actual construction work begin? I mean, are they basically ready to go over there? Is there a lot of
It'll
prep
start
work,
this fall. They've already assembled all the land. The last piece that wasn't owned by the Bradley Center was purchased about a month ago. That's the Kissinger wholesale meat facility, which the Bucks paid about, I think, 3 or 4 times its assessed value for, but that's a good place to be when you're the property owner holding the last piece of the puzzle, right? But yeah, they've been out doing their drilling in anticipation, test coring of the soil in anticipation of getting going this fall.
And the deal with the NBA was that they had to start construction in 2015, so they want to make sure that they do that.
So they'll meet that, and they already are seeing some indications of the old Ace Hardware building up there that there'll be some development in the area surrounding it. I mean, you see that moving forward quickly,
I mean, some of those plans were in the works prior to this being formally announced, but certainly having the new arena go in doesn't hurt your ability as a developer if you're trying to attract a bar and a restaurant, to a building that you've just bought. Yeah, having the arena there is certainly gonna help, but having the BMO Harris Center there certainly helps as well. But yeah, there'll be some additional things happening in that immediate area.
But as you said, I mean, there are 2 elections that are important this next year, and that's Tom Barrett. And everybody at the city seems pretty happy with this. You haven't even seen his opponents criticize him over the arena deal. Bob Bauman's I think the only one who's criticized the deal so far. But it's at the county level where you have Abley running in the spring, and already you have Marina Dmitrievich, who's expected to take a job with this new left-wing party, saying that they're looking for an opponent against him, and the arena deal will be used against him. They're trying to frame it at the county as this is something that's going to hit property tax owners, not any particular segment of the population.
All right, so we'll have more on that as that unfolds in the coming months. Right now, we're going to go to a taped segment looking at Governor Scott Walker and how he stands in the presidential polls. We're joined now by Craig Gilbert, our Washington bureau chief, to talk a little bit about how Scott Walker is faring in various polls. So, Craig, let's start with the national picture, where Scott Walker is in the top three. Importantly, kind of among the bunched up at the top is Donald Trump at 19.2%, Jeb Bush at 13.4%, and Scott Walker at 12.6%. And I should say this is a compilation of polls on the Real Clear Politics site. So, Craig, what's your take on how he's situated himself nationally? He's certainly among the leading contenders.
Yeah, if you look at the last 7 or 8 months, when he came out of the gate and after that speech in Iowa and kind of rocketed to the front of the field, he became, by anybody's measure, part of that frontier of Republican candidates nationally. His numbers kind of subsided after that as other candidates got in the race and got some attention, and he was kind of falling back into the crowd. Then with his announcement, I think he got a little bit of a bump, despite the fact that Donald Trump was kind of crowding a lot of people out and overshadowing the field. So that's why you see Trump up there with his very high name ID and all the media attention he's getting. But Scott Walker, I think, is in a pretty good place. I mean, he's up there with Jeb Bush, ahead of this very large and kind of undifferentiated pack of Republicans behind him.
All right, now let's look at Iowa, because at this stage it's not one national race, it's 50 individual races. And in Iowa, Scott Walker's faring extremely well. He still remains at the top of the pack with 19.3%, followed by Donald Trump, who they had their little back and forth on over the weekend, and then Jeb Bush after that. So, Craig, what is your take on how the governor's faring in Iowa?
He's been the front runner in Iowa for a long time now, which is, again, a good place for him to be. There is a riskiness attached to this because the expectations will be very high for him in Iowa. That's why he's spending a lot of time there. He can't afford to have a disappointing showing, especially when everybody's expecting him at this point to either win or place in Iowa. But very consistent numbers, very consistently the front runner in Iowa.
All right, let's look at a sort of a new measure out there that's sort of a popularity or favorability index and how the candidates stand. This is put together by the 538.com site based on some other numbers, and it sort of averages the national Iowa and New Hampshire polls, net favorability, who's first choice, and Walker comes out at the top of that, followed by Marco Rubio, Ben Carson, Bobby Jindal, and Carly Fiorina. Tell us a little bit about this, Craig. I think it's a little interesting in that Carson, Jindal, and Fiorina, who don't fare well in the other polls, do on a measurement like this.
I think this is more a measure of your potential upside as a candidate, because it really has a lot to do with how high or how low your negatives are. And one of Scott Walker's assets so far in this race, at least among Republican voters nationally and in a lot of these states, is his negatives are really low. He's not the best known candidate in the race, and in some cases, particularly with the national polling, he's not the person who has the most people saying he's their number one choice. But if you compare him to Donald Trump, who is the national polling leader at this point, Donald Trump's negatives are dramatically higher than Scott Walker's, which tells you that Donald Trump has a very low ceiling. I mean, his potential is very limited in this race. It's one reason why most people in the political world think he can't be the nominee. But someone like Scott Walker, someone like Marco Rubio, and a few others, have the virtue of being well-liked, even though they're not universally known, but not too many people dislike them. So that means they have the potential to grow in this race. They have the potential to kind of inherit the supporters of other candidates as they fall off.
All right, let's just talk very briefly, looking ahead to next Thursday when the first Republican debate is this sort of cast of thousands, and I think they have 2 debates just to squeeze them all in. But is this an opportunity for Scott Walker to gain support, or is he more on the just doesn't want to make any big mistakes that would cost him support at this stage?
Yeah, I mean, there's an element of both. I mean, one signal that Scott Walker has sent pretty clearly, I mean, I talked to him about this earlier this week in Philadelphia on a campaign stop, is he really doesn't want to engage with his fellow Republican candidates, certainly doesn't want to skirmish with them. he says that he views these debates as sort of a conversation directly with viewers. And so there will be some candidates who will be going on the attack, whether it's the attack against Scott Walker or the attack against Donald Trump. Scott Walker doesn't really want to be part of that. I think it serves him well. One of the reasons it serves him well is that he is somebody who's trying to attract Republican support across the spectrum. So he really doesn't want to alienate any particular group of Republicans, and it kind of fits his personal style.
All right, we'll have much more on the debate next week, but thank you for that update on the polls, Craig.
Anytime.
All right, we're back live and joined now by Mary Spicuzza, one of our state government reporters and breaking news reporter, and we're going to start looking at some of the issues that are making headlines today, including an effort by Republicans to ban the sale, donation, and use of fetal tissue. And Jason Stein in Madison is also with us. We're going to start there. Jason, tell us a little bit about where this is coming from and what how much substance is there behind this approach.
Sure. This is being driven in part by a series of videos that have been released of Planned Parenthood officials talking in very candid terms about the transfer of fetal tissues from aborted fetuses to researchers or for research purposes. This has generated a lot of controversy. And for the last 2 legislative sessions, there's actually been a proposal to address this issue that's been in the legislature. It's never gone anywhere, but it suddenly has a lot more momentum than it has had in the past. And I think we'll see a vote on it on the Assembly floor in September. And the impact of this could be anywhere from symbolic, because these transfers don't really happen in Wisconsin right now, anywhere from symbolism to very significant, depending on what wording it takes in the end.
Well, there is, talking to Dan now, and Mary, do you anticipate any pushback on this from folks who may say, look, there is some research value here, or that, there's certainly going to be some pushback on the measure, but is it more just don't regulate this, or is there some real substantive pushback on the need for this?
I think we're going to see substantive pushback from the medical community, from research communities, from, I would say, UW, which does a lot of research. I was just covering a protest outside the Planned Parenthood, however, and a lot of the people out there, I would say, are the Republican base. Republicans control both houses of the legislature. Governor Walker has been reiterating and much more vocal about his pro-life, anti-abortion views since he was reelected.
And you've already seen this nationally. This politically is becoming a debate about Planned Parenthood, not about fetal tissue so much. And so you've seen people coming out in favor and supporting Planned Parenthood in a very strong way, but you also see a number of Republicans talking about taking action like this, not just on the state level, but on the national level as well.
Yeah, for the governor, of course, if he gets to sign that bill, he's in a position as the governor who gets to do things that some of the other candidates who aren't currently in office don't get to do. So he can
particularly since he has some social conservatives saying he didn't do enough on abortion and gay rights during his time there. In the past, he's waffled on things like the 20-week, the ban after 20 weeks or whatever. But this would be an easy thing for him to approve.
All right, let's talk a little bit about another item in the news this week was the reorganization of the Department of Natural Resources. And of course, there's some pushback there from environmental groups about concerns where is the regulations going to go. It was referenced to move to an area that bills itself as a one-stop shop for business assistance. Mm-hmm. Jason, what's the reaction in Madison from folks to that in terms of is this significant changes there, and where do you see the opposition coming from?
I'm not sure that I heard the question, Greg, because of a technical difficulty, but what I can say is that I think the substantive changes at the DNR were definitely made in the state budget, where you saw some scientists' positions being lost either through layoffs or attrition at the DNR. And then I guess the question about this reorganization will be, does this represent more substantive changes, or is this more of a symbolic restructuring that may help to appease conservatives who have a lot of lingering questions about the DNR even after, even in the 4 years since Governor Walker's taken office.
All right, well, let's use that to shift a little bit to the presidential front, because also this week we've heard Walker sort of start to sketch out his vision, at least for the EPA, which is very different than how it's structured right now. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Mary?
Yeah, I don't think it was a coincidence that we heard about this DNR plan just as Walker was talking about essentially completely overhauling the EPA and returning power. He's been talking about wanting to return power to the states, and so I think the EPA would have a very uncertain future in a Walker presidency.
It's an interesting thing that he's doing this, because the EPA was actually created under a Republican president. The Clean Air Act was passed under a Republican president. Clean Water under Jimmy Carter, but it was created because the states weren't doing a very good job with air and water, and so he's wanting 40 years after, 50 years after the fact, to move it back to the states and let them take control over environmental issues.
Yeah, so would you see, what are the pushback or problems from the environmentalist perspective of if you have 50 states with a patchwork of different rules in terms of how every element is covered?
Yeah, like the Wild West of environmental regulation. I mean, how is there have been concerns from developers who want to do multi-state projects, and how is that going to go if each state has its own environmental rules?
And you'll have Republican governors who are concerned about regulation. You'll have Democratic governors who are very fond of regulation. So it depends on which state you're in as to what sort of regulation you'll see.
All right, on the presidential front, the headlines for the second week were sort of Walker versus Trump, in this case because a Walker fundraiser called Donald Trump a dum-dum, which reminds me of probably the most severe insult my grandmother ever used against anybody was a dum-dum. But talk about, the governor, his approach is, he's been saying, well, I'm not going to respond and let them talk about them. Is that a good approach with a field this size, or does you have to defend yourself? What do you do?
Well, first of all, I think it's a funny thing. He says he's not criticizing his opponents, but ever since he started talking about this, he's been sort of obliquely criticizing the others. He says, we don't want the same people, the same names and so forth running for president. Well, that's clearly a reference to Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton.
I didn't inherit fame and fortune from my family. I inherited hard work
and that
values.
Marco Rubio would be a great vice president. So, I mean, each of these things, if you don't specifically hit them square on by name, he's saying that's not criticism. So, I mean, he will criticize his opponents. He just won't do it in as a direct a manner as Donald Trump is. I mean, Donald's right there mentioning by name, saying the state's doing terribly. And, I mean, it is different, but it's his attempt to keep himself from saying that he's being
But with the
negative.
field this size, is it riskier to do what, if Scott Walker did what Donald Trump did, it's not like he's the only choice. They could move somewhere else. So it's a trickier, calculation of how do you respond when you've got 15 other choices out there.
And a lot of people know Donald Trump. They know him as a reality TV star, as a real estate mogul, as kind of a bombastic, say what he thinks guy. He has a lot of money, so he doesn't have to worry as much about upsetting funders or donors. Governor Walker, do you really want to introduce yourself to the national stage as the guy who's attacking all the other Republicans?
And he doesn't have to right now. I mean, he's in the top tier. So you're probably in the debate next week. You're going to see people on in the second tier who need to get some visibility. Someone like Rick Perry, who would be more likely to mix it up with him, because then that's the debate right then.
All right. So speaking of the debate prep, I guess it's prep week now, starting today for Governor Walker. 1 week from tonight is the first of this debate. What do you think what are his aides telling him? To attack? Don't attack? Just don't
I think
make
be
a
dull as
mistake.
dull as dirt. Yeah, I mean, which he's good at. So just be what you've always been. I mean, we've all seen him in debate regularly. He's never created a huge gaffe in any of the debates I've seen, but he's also, I can't think of any memorable line from all the
He's
debates.
kind of workmanlike going through it. He hits the points he has to hit. He doesn't get rattled. He just
The
sort
big
of
difference
goes
is
along.
in his debates in Wisconsin, he's never been behind. He's never been the second or third candidate. Here, he'll be, in the national polls, as Craig pointed out, he'll be behind Trump and Jeb Bush. But still, he's in a comfortable third position, so there's no need for him to create any news in the first debate.
I want to know is who gets to play Donald Trump in the debate prep. I mean,
We
that's
tried to
the
get-
job of the week, right? I mean, you get to just spout off or rattle off insults.
Do you have any
and-
guesses?
I don't know. Maybe it'll be Rick Wiley. I don't know who will do it. Who do you think?
I don't know, but
They'll probably have to hire people to just do you have a staff of 16? Does everybody get a role, or how?
I'm just wondering if
I
the
don't think-
Wisconsin Democrats are saying, man, I wish we had somebody like Donald Trump throwing flames and stuff at Walker last year, just like Donald Trump is doing this year.
Oh, I'm sure Hillary and Bernie are both gathering all the Trump videos so they can save it for their attack ads. You know.
Well, let's say before the debate, the governor this weekend is headed to California to kind of have a little confab with the Koch brothers. And
Trump was not invited?
Trump was not invited, but he's probably going to maybe spend his own billion. This is the other billion that's going to be spent in the presidential race, right? So well, first it's important for Walker, I guess, to make that cut, but what does he have to do as he's courting these big donors who can?
I think he's
pour in
actually
money?
already made the cut because the one Koch brother in particular, David Koch, has said very favorable things about him. And, you know, he's somebody who's on their radar. I think the question is, do they just back one candidate or do they end up supporting more than one candidate?
I think if he doesn't flop this weekend, he will be in good shape. They already like him. They've already said they think he would be a great nominee, or he should be the nominee. And unless he totally flops and chokes in front of all the donors, I think he's in
And
good shape.
I'm sure his comments about the EPA didn't hurt him. And
Right, yeah.
as long as he continues to make comments about deregulation and things like that, I'm sure he'll be fine.
Yeah. All right, I promised we'd have to mention cheesesteak. Okay, so that was his big
Right.
sort of gaffe or non-gaffe this week, depending on how it was perceived. It's certainly, I guess, not a Lambert Field kind of gaffe, but it's sort of, you want to know, what's
this is
happening
what I
in
loved.
the,
I loved, like, within 15 minutes of his ordering the American cheese on his cheesesteak, the Yahoo headline was, Walker avoids gaffe by ordering American cheese. New York Times headline was, Walker commits gaffe by ordering, and so I wasn't really sure if he had screwed up or not. I mean, my understanding is you can order one of three cheeses, right? Provolone, Cheese Whiz, or American.
That's why
But
I
I
don't
think
order
Cheese
a
Whiz
cheesesteak.
isn't Cheese
It's
Whiz
the
with
preferred-
onions
that's
is
the
supposed to
preferred,
be
yeah.
the
That's-
top tier
that's-
of presidential choice?
But in fairness, if you're the Wisconsin governor, you can't order Cheese Whiz. That's not an option for the governor of
Well,
Wisconsin.
I kind of pictured him sort of running through his mind at the checkout, looking at, okay, American cheese. That sounds really good. That's made in Wisconsin. It's patriotic, right? I mean, how do you not do the
Do you
American
think he
cheese?
still thinks of himself as the Wisconsin governor? I don't know. I think he was thinking what was the best thing to do when he was there. And that's not the only thing. He's eating his way across the country. He was in Chicago eating his cheeseburger there. So, yeah, this is...
You probably got a memo from the campaign of which food is the appropriate
Well,
one
he's
to
lost
order in
weight,
each place.
and I'm wondering what this will do to his waistline as he continues to eat across America.
I think he's still running a lot. I mean, literally running on the treadmill and running, but
All right, let's hit a couple other topics here, and then we'll get to our reader questions. So, Dan, you have a piece out this morning that it's apparently, at least from the Democratic side, it's not Senator Feingold or even former Senator Feingold. It's Russ.
It's the new Democratic Party Chairwoman Martha Landon giving a briefing to Door County Democrats, and she says that we've been told two things by the Feingold campaign. One, don't call him Senator Feingold anymore. He's just Russ. That's what he needs to be. And two, don't say he wants to go back to the Senate. Say he wants to be elected to the Senate. The idea is to present him as a fresh-faced, somebody new, someone that we haven't really heard much from before.
Well, there's some seriousness to that. I think, Jason, if you want to comment on this, I mean, you don't want, Ron Johnson ran as the outsider and won. Now Russ is kind of positioning himself as the outsider. And you don't want to be the guy who was in there for 18
truthfully,
years,
it's
right?
two insiders running against each other. You've got a guy in Ron Johnson, who likes being in Washington, and you've got Russ Feingold, who wants to be in Washington.
Yeah. So, Jason, do you have a sense? I mean, does that outsider-insider thing matter anymore, or is it? I mean, how do people
It's
see
clearly,
Feingold?
clearly that's muddied but that was something that Ron Johnson ran on. He ran on being an outsider from Washington. He ron on portraying Feingold as the insider. So clearly now Feingold's people are trying to make sure that doesn't happen again. Ron Johnson will try and I think highlight the fact that a lot of, he's had a lot of disagreements with people within his own party and so on and so forth. And I'm sure Feingold will try and argue that as a result, Johnson hasn't been able to accomplish a lot. But again, at the same time, he's been in the minority in the Senate during a really polarized time. So that's not an ideal place to be to notch a lot of accomplishments.
All right, and Dan, you had another piece up today on.
I've been a busy guy.
You've been a busy guy,
But not as busy as Mary.
Dan has already posted a piece while we've been sitting here today.
It's amazing.
He's got all these little watch things, the Apple Watch. But State Rep Mandela Barnes had some.
He was at a
choice
forum.
comments.
Yeah,
about
he was at a
Sheriff
forum
David Clark.
in Madison on Governor Walker, and somebody said Governor Walker could run on the fact that he had beaten an African American in heavily Democratic Milwaukee County, and Representative Barnes said, we only have. What he says is that we have only one countywide elected black official. Actually, we have more than one, but that's what he said, and he said he didn't even consider that one official, David Clark, to be black, which of course Sheriff Clark didn't take very well and referred to Representative Barnes as a mental midget engaging in plantation politics. But Barnes doubled down and says, he's biologically black, but that's the only way he's black. He does nothing for the communities of color.
I mean, it's just sort of a remarkable sort of comment, but when you go back at it, from a more substantive way, they get this was up before. People get
Sheriff
positioned,
Clark is not a traditional
right.
black candidate. He is.
And you see that he's not a Democrat. He's a Republican. He's this. He's that.
He says he's a Democrat, but yeah,
gauging where
right.
they are by what they do. But that's kind of
And part of the fact is that he's a Democrat is because he couldn't win as a Republican in Milwaukee County. But it's also true that he doesn't support most of the policies that the NAACP or other traditional black groups would support. And so that's the basis for Barnes's comment. But it is a weird thing to go after him and say that he doesn't think of him or accept him as black.
All right. Now we're going to hit some reader questions. The first one we're going to throw to Jason. This is from No to Walker, who asks, how many debates does Scott Walker last before he is exposed as in over his head and has to drop out of the race? Do you think he's anywhere near that stage? I mean, he's in for a long haul, right?
I was just going to throw in one
Not a
thing
Walker's
on the Mandela Barnes and Sheriff Clark spat, which is that you don't very often hear whether a white politician is white enough or is he too white. He's maybe too white sometimes, but so that's one thing that typically a white politician won't have to deal with. In terms of Walker in the debates, I think when you have that many people on stage, I think it's going to be very difficult to expect anything. You expect the unexpected when you have that many folks. And I will say it does make it more risk reward, because how many times are you really going to get to speak in that environment? So I think every candidate is going to have to nail their one or two chances, because
you say that, but the last time 4 years ago when you had 12 candidates running, you had some entertaining stuff go on. I mean, you had the very defining moment for Rick Perry where he couldn't remember the third agency that he wanted to eliminate. I mean, there was other stuff going on. So,
Yeah.
But I think that's exactly it, though, is that if you have a Rick Perry moment, don't expect to get another hour of talking to help bury that in your readers' minds.
So I think it's low reward, high risk.
All right, let's go to the next question. I'm going to throw this one to Dan from GOP fan, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier. Says, what do you make of the bromance between Scott Walker and Marco Rubio? At least one of them has to make it on the ticket, right? Is it a bromance? Maybe they're both kind of antagonizing each other, but claiming the other should be the vice president.
That's probably closer.
Yeah, I don't. First of all, I don't think and I know this. The Marco Rubio camp did not appreciate earlier when Walker suggested that he would make a good vice presidential candidate. I think what's going on is you have three candidates who are out front right now. Four candidates now with Trump. You have Trump, Rubio, Jeb Bush, and Scott Walker, and the criticisms and the back and forth between them, that's the legitimate debate that's going on. The rest of it is peripheral to the election.
Yeah, but just to that second part of the question, Mary, of the two, I mean, you probably can't realistically see a Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio ticket, because one of them should get you Florida. You don't need them both. But is one of them, between those two, Rubio and Walker, top spot, second spot, are they both?
Well, I think that's what they're jockeying for right now, and people have said, Walker keeps mentioning Rubio as a good vice president, and the translation is he wouldn't be a good president, but he'd be a great running mate for me. But then Rubio said, well, if there's a Walker, I like the idea of a Walker-Rubio ticket, but Rubio, it would have to be an
Alphabetical
alphabetical
order.
order kind of thing.
But then when this came up about a vice presidential candidate with Donald Trump, Scott Walker said, well, I think it's too early to be talking about vice presidential candidates. Wait a second, just
Okay.
a month ago
Let's
you were
not
talking about...
mandate consistency, because if everybody was consistent, none of us would have jobs,
He
right?
mentioned Rubio again when he was out skeet shooting too. He was skeet shooting with a columnist.
The funny thing is, it works for him to have Rubio as a vice presidential candidate. I don't see a huge benefit the other way around. If Rubio is the nominee, Ryan last time showed that he couldn't carry the state, and the state is not as pivotal as Ohio or some other states out there.
All right, so we'll have a lot of that to chew on in the coming months. Next week, we'll be back at the same time and same location talking about the first of the presidential debates next Thursday night. So thanks for joining us.